Welcome, Falcon fans, to a special video today to discuss mental wellness. It is National Mental Wellness Month, and the NCAA Division III is dedicated this week to mental wellness and everything that goes along with it. And joined here today, Steve Schar, joined here with Jeremy Schumacher, CUW's mental wellness coach, Anna Abella from the field hockey team, Megan Mayer from women's volleyball, and Kyle Fuller from the men's lacrosse team. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Jeremy, if you could kind of just give a quick summary of some of the things that you've worked with the athletes, maybe since this whole COVID-19 pandemic has started, or maybe in the year and a half that you've been the mental wellness coach, and why it's important to have a week dedicated to mental wellness and discussing it.
Yeah, I think it's really helpful to raise the awareness. I think having someone in our department specifically to work with student athletes has been really helpful. Student athletes have a lot on their plate in addition to being just students and trying to maintain a good GPA and do well in their classwork. They have practice, they have lifting, they have conditioning. So part of the idea behind my position was I could be a little bit more flexible as a coach. My schedule out of season is flexible. In season gets a little crazy, but I understand kind of where the athletes are coming from, played sports in college myself, and really just working with whatever the athletes bring in. So maybe it's a mental health issue, anxiety, depression, maybe it's transition to college or being homesick or a roommate issue, and then sports-specific things. So sports performance, maybe not getting along with a coach or a teammate, not getting the playing time you want to have, dealing with an injury. So really whatever the student athletes come in, I try and meet them where they're at. But I think a week like this and a whole month about mental health is important because it just doesn't discriminate. So it doesn't hit athletes harder or less hard than regular athletes. It hits everybody kind of the same. And it's something that athletes tend to just kind of take, like, I'm going to deal with this myself. So trying to normalize it a little bit and break the stigmas around mental health to make it like you would go see your athletic trainer if you got hurt. So you can go talk to a teammate or go talk to someone like me or another counselor if you have a mental issue. So I think just trying to normalize that.
As we open up this roundtable discussion, let's turn to you, Megan. Being a senior, just ended your career, how important is it to have a week and a month like this to talk about some of these issues, just opening up with maybe Jeremy Schumacher, who's the mental wellness coach, or your other coach, or your teammates even, just having this ability to say, it's okay to discuss this. If you have issues, let's talk about them and see what's going on to fix it.
Yeah, well, I think that mental health is a super important thing to advocate for, whether you're an athlete or not. But like you and Jeremy said, student athletes have a lot on their plates as it is. And I think with physical injuries too, it's easy enough for us to just say, you know, like, tape me out, put me in, I'm ready to play. But you can't just do that with your mental health. So the way to go about that is definitely by talking to your coaches, talking to your teammates. You know, as athletes, we are blessed that we have so many people that we can go to. Our teammates are there for us. Our coaches are there for us. Our teammates sometimes know us best. And sometimes when you don't realize that there's something going on, it shows in your performance, or, you know, maybe your teammates notice and they bring it up to your coaches. But I think we're really lucky to be around so many people that know us really well and care about us. And so that's just the first step, I think, to really overcoming the problems that you have with your mental health, is just talking about it and knowing, you know, who to open up to. And being a good teammate to other people is important too. Like, if you notice that they're a little off, bring it up to them, talk to your coaches, talk to them. But I think the first really important step is just to start in that conversation. It can be hard to talk about, but when somebody makes that first step and really gets you to talk about it and realize that there's something going on, that's the first step to really overcoming it.
Kyle, I wanted to ask you, there's the stigma out there, you know, being a man, of it's not okay to talk about some of these issues. Being a man yourself and on a men's team, how do you go about opening up to some of your teammates, or if you see issues that they want to talk about, how do you go about doing that if you can?
Sure. It
comes up in a lot less formal way. Most of the time it just starts out with, hey, how's it going? It's not necessarily, how is your mental health? Because many men will tell you off the bat, oh, I'm fine, like I'm strong. So sometimes you have to dig a little deeper through the daily things like, oh, my classes are really stressing me out. And you hear like maybe one of their friendships is really stressing them out or something, and they were sick last week. So I think it's trying to find the daily things and kind of dig a little deeper within those instead of just kind of coming forward and asking like, how is your mental health? Because that can be, for men and women, that can be a thing like, whoa, mental health, like I'm okay. I don't need to talk about my mental health. So just maybe approaching it with more of an angle of how are you doing as a person instead of how is your mental health.
And Anna, I wanted to ask you, being in field hockey, and it starts before school starts, you really don't have much time to acclimate yourself, whether it be if you're a freshman to school or whatever the case is. Does it come up at all in training camp in the fall before school starts? Because really you're only focusing on your sport, of taking care of yourself mentally as well as physically. Does that discussion ever come up amongst your team?
It comes up a lot, definitely, because especially field hockey right now has a large freshman class, so we were all coming in at one time, and I definitely think it really showed just how prevalent mental health is in athletes, because there were a lot of us who were having a hard time adjusting to being away from home for the first time, and adding that onto the physical like standards that you have to be up to play at a collegiate level was very difficult for a lot of us. And there was a lot of like, even during preseason, and which is our training camp before school, it was very difficult to try and like adjust right away, especially coming into practices 3 times a day and meeting and being in a whole new environment.
Jeremy, I wanted to ask you, one of the topics I wanted to touch on was stress and how to deal with it, individually or as a team, and just trying to manage everything that goes on with being a student athlete. Are there certain things that you try to tell a student athlete, or certain, do yoga or meditate, or is there certain things that you ask them to do to try to, I guess, manage it all?
Yeah, a lot of athletes have like their systems in place already. I think a lot of it's fine tuning kind of what they're already doing. What I've worked with a lot is student athletes not making the time to take care of themselves. So it's just kind of go, 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 and I'll catch up on sleep, or I'll catch up on recreation once season's done. So they kind of get into a routine with going, and not really taking that time to kind of reset and rejuvenate themselves. Adrenaline with being in the sport and competition kind of masks it for a long time, I think. So a lot of it's not so much creating a new coping mechanism as trying to carve out some time in their schedule where they can actually use the coping skills they have. For a lot of them, it's like, I'm just going to sleep because I'm exhausted and I'm tired all the time. So it's tightening up the schedule a little bit, and then trying to say like, hey, you can take 20 minutes to go for a walk. You can take 20 minutes to watch a show or do some yoga, and you're going to get that time back. Like, your brain will be functioning better if you invest that time in yourself. And I think for a lot of student athletes, they're kind of resistant at first because they're so hardwired to be out of time. I don't have time. You can tell me to do yoga all you want. You can tell me to take a break and watch a show, but I don't have time. So I think until they really experience that, like, oh, I'm happier and healthier and actually more efficient when I invest that time in myself. So a lot of it's figuring out what they like to do already and just finding that time in their schedules. Out of season, it's a lot easier, I think. I think kids manage it pretty well. And we have a couple athletes who do fall sports. I think fall sports gets a head start because they start out busy, and then once the season's done, their schedule relaxes a lot. So I think that's helpful for getting the schedule. And then for lacrosse, for Kyle, it's just kind of trying to maintain. And then when you add in your sport partway through the school year, you got to adjust your schedule and kind of have your system in place already, and then be able to add practice and conditioning and all that stuff on top of it.
One of the things I wanted to ask for, all 3 of you, is your seasons are very condensed. as opposed to a winter season that's prolonged over 4 or 5 months. I mean, you're trying to jam in everything you can in a 3-month time frame. What have is maybe a question for Megan? What have you learned over the course of your 4 years? Maybe some tips or tricks and trying to manage and handle the stress that you have seen work for yourself personally, but that you've shared with your teammates or just other athletes in other sports.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think that compartmentalization is important for all student athletes just because we do have a lot going on. There's schoolwork, there's jobs, there's social lives and friendships and relationships. And then obviously our sport, we have practice every day, big games, and those take a lot of focus. So I think just kind of trying to put aside, whatever anxieties and stresses are going on outside of your sport, and then really focusing in on just practice time, your teammates, and focusing on just your love for the game is one way. And then, like Jeremy said, finding something that you really enjoy, whether it be yoga, whether it be going for walks, whatever it is, making time for something that allows you to relax and, like Jeremy said, get that time back then when you do have to be focused.
Anna, maybe for you, what are some things that you did this past year during the season to try and give yourself 15 minutes to not think about anything but yourself?
I'd have to say it was definitely really hard. And when I first started seeing Jeremy like on a routine basis, I was very adamant on not making that time. Like he said, like very resistant. Every meeting I'd pull out my planner, I'd be like, if you find time in my schedule, like I'll do it, but I don't have any time. So it's definitely very difficult. And I would have to be one of those people that like, has a hard time finding time. But really, it took me being not in a good place mentally to realize that I needed to take 15 minutes a day, 10 minutes a day, even 5 minutes a day to put myself first, so that way I was performing the best I could in classes and on the field. So that included just like taking a walk. I read books sometimes, but yeah, just small things like that, or watching Netflix or something on YouTube, like just stupid videos or something. That's really how I like decompress during the season, but it took me a very long time, and I'm still working on that now, but it's definitely gotten a lot better.
Speaking to what Anna said too, I think just having an accountability partner, whether it's a teammate or a friend, a coach, whoever. Shout out to Kendall Stribbling. She was my accountability partner. I was Ken's. So just making sure that someone is making time for, like Anna said, those things that you really need to decompress. And I think that until once you see the results of that and that you actually are getting that time back later, until you see those results, that's what it takes to kind of start doing that on a regular basis. So yeah, accountability partners are huge.
Kyle,
Yeah.
for you, Anna and Megan didn't have to experience this where their season was cut short because of this COVID-19. How did you go about handling the stress of knowing that your season could potentially end early and maybe tomorrow, and then all of a sudden, Coach Fahey had a meeting is basically we're done. I mean, how did you go about handling that stress, or I guess the week or 2 weeks leading up to it, thinking about it constantly all the time?
Yeah, so it was definitely tough. And kind of with lacrosse, we talk about it being a really long season. And in games, we'll be like, hey, it's a long game. We got a lot of time left. So I agree that spring and fall sports are jam-packed. So they definitely feel quick looking back on them because you go through a lot. We talk about how seasons are really long. So honestly, the week before spring break is when we figured out that we were going to be done playing. But the 2 weeks before spring break, we were preparing as usual. There wasn't really anything going on. We were looking forward to our next game, getting ready for practice, and there wasn't really any talk about the potential of our season ending. And then our first kind of insight on the possibility of our season being cut short was Beloit suspended all of their sports. and that was our first game that was ended up going to be canceled from that. So we were like, okay, maybe there's just going to be a few schools that pull out that are in high threat areas. And then later that week, the Ivy League suspended all their sports, and then people were like, okay, this is a little more real now. And we wanted to make sure, like, in practice, there was definitely an energy of, we're not going to worry about this right now in practice. We're going to worry about being with each other right now, because we don't necessarily know how much time we have left. And then it was during our game at MSOE that we got the email saying that classes were going to be moved to remote. And then things started to hit a little deeper. And then within the next 48 hours, it all progressed to our season was going to be done. And we had a meeting that was, Coach Fahey just sitting down with everyone, letting everybody know, like, hey, this is probably the last time we're going to see everyone. Our season's not officially canceled yet, but it's pretty much 100% guarantee. And that was really tough because we have guys on the lacrosse team from all over Colorado, California, all over the Midwest, East Coast. And it was really tough to see the seniors and juniors and even freshmen. We had an outstanding freshman class this year that pour their hearts into this sport. And we had a really, really well-bonded team this year. So it was really challenging to have that quick turn of we as a team are thinking long-term to all of a sudden having it be very short-term and just have to focus on today. And I think Coach Fahey and the rest of the coaching staff and our seniors kind of carried themselves really well in that sense of just, hey, let's focus on today. Let's be with each other. And I think that that's going to make next year's team even stronger because we're really focused on just bonding together and enjoying the time we have and making everything count.
One thing I want to ask, I read an article recently about student athletes and how you as a population are the ones people are somewhat forgetting about in the sense that you can control things. You can control your schedule. I mean, practices are planned out. You know, you can control how well you play in a game in a sense. You know, you feel like you have control over your day-to-day and week by week. When, you know, with COVID-19 and everything started getting canceled, you kind of lost that control in a sense that you don't have practice right now. You don't have a game. You're trying to do classes at home in your bedroom or on your couch or wherever it may be. How difficult is it to try and grasp and take in or think about that you lost some of that control? That's, I guess, a question, or any of you can answer that.
Well, I think I'm going to jump in here for a second. I think all of you have missed some time due to injury. And it's a similar thing. Obviously, it's time constraints are different, but talking about how to manage having to take some time away because of an injury, which is really a thing that's out of your control.
Yeah, I agree with the injury side of things. Before last year, I got a concussion in the early part of our season and ended up being out for, I believe, 5 or 6 weeks. I hadn't really had a injury that took me out of my sport. I had been like kind of playing through the pain in high school. High school season's a lot shorter, but having that unpredictability of an injury and not knowing when you're going to fully recover definitely prepared me for this. So looking back, I'm thankful that I was able to be prepared for this situation in a way, but I think just trying to find the things that you can control right now as an athlete really makes the things that you can't control seem less uncontrollable. For example, our athletic trainer, Josh, he will host team workouts over Zoom. So we'll get a few guys in there every day working out through the computer screen, which is kind of funny, but it's good to see everyone jumping around in their bedroom or at a park or have their Wi-Fi cut out. Like, it's the things that you can control are a lot more valuable than they were when we were at school, because they were just things that we kind of took for granted and accepted, which is another thing we talked about at the team a lot, is just don't take the things for granted that can be taken away so easily. So I think finding the things you can control right now are even more important than they were before.
And Anna, maybe a question for you is, you had talked about you kind of realized you needed to go talk to Jeremy. At what point does it come to when you start to realize, hey, my mental state, I'm not as fresh or as sharp as I can be? let's go seek out Jeremy, or let me find my coach or teammate. How does that moment come to you, like, hey, I need to go talk about this, as opposed to try to compartmentalize it and do it on your own? How does that come to, and is it easy, or is it really difficult to go find Jeremy and say, hey, let's talk right now. I need to be sharper.
Yeah, so I had come into Concordia with like some pre-existing conditions, but for the most part, like I felt really healthy physically and mentally, and I didn't think there'd be any issues. Like I was really excited to come to CUW and be a part of the field hockey team. But it took, I think, like 2 weeks in, maybe, and I was already stressed out of my mind, and I started to have a lot of anxiety attacks during practice where I felt like I couldn't breathe, and different things like that, and it was really affecting my performance. So I was sitting down with the trainer, shout out to Kristen Isles, she's the best trainer at CUW, no cap, and she sat me down after I was having one of my like anxiety attacks during practice, and she was like, have you considered talking to anyone on campus? Like, we have a counseling center, we have Jeremy, we have XYZ resources that you can use, or even just talking to coach about it. And I was like, I didn't even know we had a counseling center. I didn't know Jeremy was a thing. So I think it's really just one, advocating for like telling your teammates like, hey, this resource is available. But it was really nice that I was able to connect, and we talked to my coach after that practice, and I got in contact with Jeremy, and I immediately started seeing him like on a weekly basis, and it really turned a lot of things around, and I felt like I could talk and confide in someone who wasn't going to judge me, who could offer me unbiased advice and really help me cope with a lot of my stresses as a student and an athlete, but also wouldn't keep me off the field.
Megan, a question for you. You had been, throughout the course of your career, you won several championships. But you also lost a couple too. As you progress throughout your career, maybe let's talk specifically your freshman year, you won the CIVT title in the fall to begin in the season, and then you get to some title games. Was there anxiety knowing that you're going into a match that had so much on the line to get to the NCAA tournament? Do you have any anxiety at that moment or that time? And if you did, as a freshman, how do you remember dealing with that as opposed to your sophomore, junior, and maybe this last year? Was there any, because you had done it a number of times?
Well, I think freshman year, it was a little different. I don't think there was any anxiety at all because I was coming as a freshman. I had nothing to expect. So I had a lot of great senior leaders on that team that year, a lot of people to look up to, great coaches. So I think it was more exciting than anything. But I would say after freshman and sophomore year of going to the NCAA tournament 2 years in a row, there was definitely a lot on the line and higher stakes junior and senior year. So it was frustrating not to make it back to the NCAA junior year and senior year. But yeah, I think that when you have those high expectations, it can be a little more stressful going into those games. For us, it was playing Aurora for the conference championship game all 4 years. So I felt that our whole team kind of had that pressure on us. But I think just relying on your teammates, relying on your coaches, and for our team, pregame pump-ups were huge. So we did team devotions, got the music blasting and all that stuff. So I think just really like tuning into that energy that you get from your teammates is super important, and it kind of just makes you focus in on 1 point at a time and just playing the game you love, not really the big picture of, oh, we're playing the same team for the conference championship as we did last year and we're expected to win. I think it's more about just, again, focusing on 1 point at a time and just kind of being in the moment.
Jeremy, how do you go about discussing with an athlete that may come to you the anxiety or the stress they may have from a regular season game, say the first, second, third game of the year, as opposed to now you get to tournament time and it's win or go home, or maybe win the title and go to the NCAA tournament? Do you have different types of discussions at different points of the season when either the stress level or the anxiety goes up or down?
Yeah, I think it's trying to set realistic expectations. So I see a lot more. There are times in the season I can kind of track with the sports where I'll get a lot busier because conference tournaments are coming up or finals are coming up. And I start seeing more kids all of a sudden. But I think with the bigger games, it's a lot of added pressure, and it's kind of figuring out how to silence some of that. If you're playing for a conference championship, it's because you've won a lot of games throughout the course of the season. So you know how to win, you know what your team does well, you know what your role on the team is. So kind of going back to our earlier talking point of what you can control is worrying less about that team that's on the other side of the field or across from you and really focusing on executing what you need to. So we do a lot of like visualization with some kids. I'm really big on mindfulness, just learning how to be in that present moment and focused on something like footwork instead of focusing on, oh, that was a bad call, or, you know, whatever happened to play before, just focusing like, okay, this is the thing I can control. I'm going to have a good pass, or I'm going to make a smart play. I'm going to be in the right top position. I'm going to make sure I'm talking to my teammates. Those are all things that you can control. So that stuff's consistent. I would say the importance of it increases, but it's kind of trying to get athletes out of their heads about, oh, it's a big game, or I have more pressure, and just focus on like, okay, it's lacrosse, it's field hockey, it's volleyball, it's whatever sport, soccer, hockey, baseball. It's a thing you've been playing since you were 4 or 5 years old. You know what you're doing. Like, let's focus on things that you can control. What can your mindset be heading into that game so that your focus is where it needs to be?
Megan, maybe for you, how did you progress throughout the course of your career and learning some of the tactics or the tips that Jeremy had talked about or explained, or being in that moment? Did you feel yourself as your career progressed to be more in the moment in bigger situations of the games?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I can definitely feel the growth from freshman year to senior year season. I think that you discover a lot about yourself as a person, being a student athlete especially, and having to manage all the different activities that you have every day, the homework, the practice, and social relationships, everything. But I think that I grew most from actually being at a lower point in my mental health. So for me, it was body image, and that's always kind of been there. But then junior year, when I had my hardest class load, I started to struggle a little bit in my performance, I think. And I know Anna talked about earlier how she came to seek out Jeremy, but for me, it was my teammates. And I'm sure my coaches noticed that my performance had been a little off, maybe didn't know why. And it was actually my closest teammates that knew me best and brought it up to Jeremy and Janelle and got me in there and got me talking about it. So I think for me, it was relying on my teammates to keep me accountable. And once I was able to do that and realize that I need to make changes, then I was able to learn more about myself and grow as not only an athlete, but a person too, and become more mentally strong and kind of figure out ways to, again, compartmentalize and then kind of deal with those things that have been going on. And that really helped my performance in the end.
For Kyle and Anna, being younger in your careers, did you know about Jeremy's position when you came in, or I guess when you found out about it, how important was the value in knowing that we have somebody dedicated to worrying about and caring for the mental side of the game?
It was super important to know that you have that resource there for you. I don't remember exactly when I first heard about Jeremy's position. I remember that I am interested in going into sports psychology and working with athletes myself. So that was already a really cool thing that we have a resource like that at Concordia. But being a freshman or a transfer student or anyone coming into Concordia, you get so much thrown at you. And then with athletes, you get a bunch of stuff thrown at you as well. Like they get everyone together in the field house. They tell everyone what's going on for the entire season. It's a lot to remember. But I remember this year when Jeremy was introducing himself, there was just kind of like a calming energy that was like, I have that resource there for me if I need it. And obviously a gigantic part of advocating for your own mental wellness is reaching out and actually asking for help. But the ability to know like, okay, now I know where to go to ask for help was really huge. And it allowed me to like take the stress off of thinking like, where do I need to go? Do I talk to my coach about this? Do I talk to my teammates? And ultimately, everyone's going to lead you to the right resource. Because seeing a psychologist may not be the best way for you to deal with it. It might be talking with a teammate or calling your grandma or someone else. But just having that resource available was probably the biggest like calming thing for me.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with Kyle on that one. Just knowing that there's someone there that you can rely on outside of your teammates or your coach or anyone you might meet on campus, I think was really nice, like, and comforting. But I also just want to point out that you don't necessarily have to be struggling mentally to go and see a counselor. It's very important too to just maybe even learn those different coping mechanisms. So that way when you are stressed out, you can utilize and implement them into your everyday routine to do a little like prehab so you don't get to such a dark place where you feel like you have to go see a psychologist or a mental wellness coach or a counselor, or like even go to the hospital or something like that.
Megan, I wanted to ask you, you had mentioned your junior year, your performance kind of dipped a little bit because of some of the things you were trying to work through yourself, and you said your teammates noticed something was going on. Were you okay with that and noticing that your teammates had seen that something needed to be discussed, and maybe did they go seek out Jeremy to connect the two of you? Or, and is it all right for teammates to, I got a question for any of you, I guess, after Megan answers, is it okay for your teammates to approach you and say, hey, is there something off that we need to discuss?
I think at first I was frustrated. So I think if you had asked me at that moment, when my teammates first came to me, if it would have been okay with me, I'd probably say no. But in the end, I'm really glad that they did, because I think that unless my teammates had brought it to my attention, I would have continued on just kind of trying to handle things on my own. And I think that I thought that I could do everything on my own. I didn't need any help, and I guess I didn't realize how much it was impacting my performance. So I would definitely recommend teammates advocating for each other, because I think that even without the stigma that there is around mental health, it's hard enough for athletes to go seek out that help. It might be because they don't even think that there's a problem. They're in denial of it. They don't want family members to worry about them. They don't want to make the time to do it because they don't think they have time, whatever it may be. But regardless of the stigma around mental health, it's hard to go seek out help. And I think that teammates who are there with you every day at practice and who are closest to you are a huge part of opening up that conversation and getting you to make that first step to realize that it's okay to be struggling and not really feel okay. Like, it's okay to go get help. We are athletes. We're kind of taught to feel invincible, but it's not always that way. And we do have a lot on our plates. And so just realizing that there are resources out there, there are coaches, there are athletes, there's like your teammates, family, whoever it may be, to help. It's important to realize that those resources are there for you.
Yeah, bouncing off what Megan was saying, I think that the fact that your teammates are there with you every day, although no one on the team may have the same major, they're all in the closest scenario to what you're going through on a daily schedule. If you're in season, especially, because you might have practice, film, and lifting all in a day. So you're all kind of revolving around the same clock, so to speak. So just having that person there that knows a little bit about what you're going through. Obviously, no one's going to know exactly what you go through on a day-to-day basis, and it's important to have other friends outside of your sport. But your teammates are huge to rely on as a crutch. And then even other athletes in other sports, like, hey, how are you doing this? How is your team approaching this? I think that can be really insightful to get perspective on your own ways of handling with really stressful situations.
Adding on to that, I am definitely one of those teammates that carries around Jeremy's card or like his information, and every time someone tells me they're like struggling or they're really stressed out, I'm like, hey, like I'm always here to talk, but if you want to talk to like someone who's actually trained to do this, here's Jeremy's info. So I definitely think like it's really important, like Megan and Kyle said, like having your teammates to support you, but also just like if your teammate has a resource that you can utilize, I think it's really important to share that, because you never know who might truly need it or be in such a place that if they don't receive the help that they need, athlete or not, that things could go bad. But yeah, I definitely agree. Like having a teammate is super supportive when you're talking about mental health.
Jeremy, when you introduce yourself to the teams, do you discuss it all to look out for one another? And Mega said she had some teammates that said something looks off. Do you discuss it at all to look out for one another and openly discuss it? If you see something doesn't look right from a performance standpoint, or you're having struggles in the classroom or socially, to openly ask and see if there's a time you want to talk or to go find you?
Yeah, I get to talk every year at student athlete orientation, which Kyle referenced, is when we get everyone into the auditorium or into the field house and throw a bunch of information at them. I'm part of that information, but the thing that I talk about is like, if you see something, say something. It might be uncomfortable. It might not be in your comfort zone personally to say, hey, like, are you struggling? But if that person is struggling and they're, like Megan said, maybe in denial about it, or they're not aware that it's noticeable to other people, maybe they're dealing with some shame about it or whatever it is, and they're trying to keep it hidden. If they know, if somebody brings it up, it just opens the door. So I talk to certain teams as a whole, and I don't always work with kids from those teams personally, but I think just the idea that like, hey, mental health is a thing that it's okay to talk about. Like, it's okay to not be okay, and it's okay to talk about that. I think just saying that out loud sometimes makes a huge difference for people. So I've had athletes come and want to have their trainer in, and our ATs are awesome. Anna and Kyle shouted out their AT already. I'll just shout out the whole department. Like, they're great. They're very in tune with their athletes that they work with and make good referrals when they need to, bring me in on stuff when they need to. So that's really awesome that we have a good working relationship, and they're super supportive. But I think just having somebody bring up mental health opens the door for people who might be uncomfortable talking about it to know, hey, these are people who maybe are further along in their process than me, or are more comfortable talking about it than I am. So I think that's been really good. Our coaching staff has been good. They email me or pop in the office and ask me questions when they have it about it. So I think just as a whole department, the athletes, the trainers, the coaches, everybody's, my experience, and I'm biased because I'm an expert in it, but my experience has been really positive with it, that people are open and willing to talk about it. So I think that's part of what we're trying to do is break that stigma and make it okay for the people who feel like it's not okay to talk about it. Because I think most athletes who have brought something up or had teammates bring something up would say ultimately it was a helpful thing.
A question for all of you, whether you're still dealing with it or have dealt with it, at the point where you felt like you were lowest compared to where you are now, how important has it been to discuss your mental wellness to be stronger than what you were, say, at your lower point?
I can definitely speak to that, because I know that after that junior season, and I really got in talking to the coaches about what was going on, I definitely devoted that whole off season and the summer up until my senior season, really focusing on strengthening that mental health and making sure I was at a good place, working out for the right reasons, and just being strong physically and mentally. Um, the difference that I saw from junior season to senior season was like a complete 180. I felt stronger mentally and physically. I was a better teammate. I was more supportive on the court, more focused, more resilient. And yeah, so just, I think that you'd be surprised how much your performance can change just when you're compared to when you're mentally strong and when you're not. So, yeah.
The one thing that people are always going to maybe ask it, or not ask, but they see your physical performance being an athlete. Could you discuss at all your performance maybe in the classroom or just socially, um, being on point, or whatever the case is, just feeling better on a day-to-day basis, being mentally sharp and aware of what's going on, as opposed to feeling like you're getting bogged down or are bogged down?
So, Anna, you can go.
Sorry, no, God, you can go.
Okay. One of the biggest things that I do is I try and make the mundane or tasks that I don't necessarily want to do different, and I change it up, whether that's going and studying outside on the bluff or something, or that's changing the workout on our optional workout days, and just doing something that I like to do that I know will improve, or going and shooting with some guys I normally don't shoot with, or even like going and doing like a basketball workout with one of my friends. It's just trying to switch things up, because as a student athlete, you take on a bunch of different things on a day-to-day basis. We've talked about that a bunch, full schedules, and it's very easy to not find time. Like Anna was talking about, like, I don't have time to do anything. So it's taking that time that you are doing something and changing it so that you're kind of cheating your productivity, where you feel like you're having fun, but you're still doing something productive. That's how I like to stay mentally fresh, because it's, if you feel like you're having fun, then you don't feel like you're working as hard.
Yeah, going off of what Kyle said, I know personally I had a large struggle with even going to class and doing my homework at one point during the fall semester. So it was a huge change for me spring semester when I was out of season, when I was really focusing on my mental health. I apologize, the garbage man is outside. I don't know if you can hear. It was a huge 180 going from fall season to spring semester, when I was actually putting the time and effort into focusing on my mental health and really make sure like my mental well-being was as just at peak performance as my physical well-being. And I think it's really turned around for the better. And that just includes, like what Kyle said, doing things that you enjoy doing, even if it's for 5 or 10 minutes a day. Napping is not a good stress reliever though, so I've been told, so I try not to nap as often, but I definitely like to play my piano a lot, or go for a walk with my dad, just small things like that to switch it up.
Yeah, something that Anna just mentioned that I completely agree with is that you can't just focus on your physical health. So as athletes, I feel like a lot of times we're just like, we hit the weight room and we work to be stronger physically, but honestly, if you're not strong mentally and physically, your performance is not going to be at its peak. It just can't be. So like Kyle and Anna both said, just taking time to do something mentally for yourself, that keeps your mental health sharp and keeps your mind happy, that's when your performance is going to be at its best.
Jeremy, have you noticed at all any differences across maybe sport to sport or seasons or male to female when it comes to mental health and the things you talk about, or tips and tricks to be better? Is there certain things that you can discuss in that type of question?
No, I think the thing that grabs my attention in the work that I do is more the similarities and the differences. I picked 3 athletes that I was familiar with for different reasons, and they can all relate to each other on time constraints, on dealing with an injury, on all these things. So different majors, different backgrounds, different sports, but the things that they're dealing with and the things that they can relate on is shocking to me more than the differences are. I think, yeah, you have some gender differences and how people are socialized, males and females, and you have some of that stuff. Team dynamics are sometimes different based on the gender of the sport, but each team and each season I think is a little different and has a different feel to it. So those stereotypes I don't find to be particularly helpful, because the differences from season to season can be a lot. I think Megs as a senior would know kind of each season has a different feel to it. You bring in a big freshman class that changes the vibe. So I think it's more the similarities that I try and focus on, the things that people maybe aren't talking about but can totally relate on. Most students are pretty open about school being stressful, but most athletes are aware of like stress with game days, stress with travel, stress with not performing at the level that you want to. So a lot of those things are almost universal for athletes.
Megan, a question that I'm going to see how you answer this. And every year as I've done my job here is you see seniors come and go. And the one thing that you always try to talk about is you only have a 4-year window. You know, it comes and it goes very quickly. Now that your career is over, how do you look back on your career and then knowing that it's done, what's next in life? Trying to find a job and graduate and handling all that and the stresses and maybe some anxiety of, you know, maybe the studying at home and not being able to walk here in May like you're supposed to be. How do you handle all that knowing that your career is over and you have the next chapter in life that's beginning?
Well, I think that, I think being a student athlete and just seeing myself grow the last 4 years, again, it's taught me how to manage my time a lot better. And I have a lot of great memories from not just volleyball, but school. And I think that regardless of the situation now, with not being able to walk during graduation, no one can take away those memories that you've made as a student athlete at Concordia, and no one can take away the things that you've learned and the things that I will continue to carry with me. The lessons, the people, you know, those are things that you're going to remember. And so I guess moving forward, just taking everything that I've learned and my growth as a person and using that in the job that I'm going to have someday.
One thing I wanted to ask for all of you is that being in your generation, people who are older, even myself growing up, mental health, you just didn't talk about it. If you had an issue, you compartmentalize it, you dealt with it on your own, you know, grow up, be a big boy, be stronger, right? In your generation, it seems like it's easier or it's more accepting to talk about it and to break that stigma that's being discussed now. How do you go about, as in the age bracket that you're in, discussing it with people that are older and telling them or expressing the value and the importance to talk about your mental wellness, either it be your parents or your grandparents or neighbors or whoever it is that is a little bit older than you? How do you go about doing that, and why do it to break that stigma?
So when I first talked to my parents about my mental health or my mental well-being, I was in the hospital in high school, so it obviously didn't go the best because I did keep it in a lot because that was really a learned behavior. Like, you don't talk about how you are mentally. But at least since like growing up, I kind of owned it. The fact that, like, you know, a mental illness is not necessarily something bad to have. It's just something that's a part of you right now that you're working through, but it's not something that is gonna damage who you are or what you stand for, or your personality or anything like that. It's something you work through and you can overcome. It just takes time. But now my parents and I have a really open discussion about it. It's kind of unfortunate that I felt like I needed to get to a bad place for my parents to hear me almost, or to even talk about it with my parents. But that's why I really try to reinforce like having a good, stable relationship with your parents, or even if it's a sibling or a really close friend or relative, just having someone you can talk to who can try and help you communicate that to someone of an older generation or a different ethnic or racial background who might have different stigmas or stereotypes around mental health. Just having a close connection with someone who can just help and be there and go to bat for you with whoever you're talking to.
Yeah, I think Jeremy brought up a really interesting and relevant point to this earlier about how it's a really positive experience that the people he's worked with have had. And kind of talking about that with different generations, like all of my friends that play different sports have had really good positive experiences talking about their mental health and have learned something They may have not noticed the drastic change immediately, but they have learned something about themselves, which is incredibly valuable going forward, especially as a college age student or as a parent, and just progressing forward in life, being able to say, like, a lot of people I know have benefited largely from just talking about their mental health and or just being an advocate for taking care of themselves.
Yeah, I think talking to my parents, I think that the age gap, and like Steve was saying about how being very open about mental health was a lot less accepted until recently. But so I think that's part of the reason why I waited so long to talk to them about it, and in talking to my coaches when they encouraged me to go to my parents, let them know what was going on. I definitely didn't want to, but I think deep down it comes down to the fact that your family or whoever it may be that's hard to talk to, what they care about is you, and that you're well, and that you're taking the steps that you need to in order to make sure you're at your best. And as long as that's the case, I think that keeping that in mind can make it easier to talk to people about what's going on. Just remember that they have your best interests at stake, and they would rather know what's going on than let you continue to struggle.
A question for everyone is, when you told your friends or your teammates or your family, when you started to build that network around you and that support system to know that you wanted to openly discuss your mental wellness in whatever capacity it was, how much value is there in having that network around you, whether it be small or very large?
I think it's cool just to see how many people care. Like when you finally open up and talk about it, you realize how many people are really there for you, and you realize who is most important in your life. But I don't know. Yeah, I think for me, once I started talking to more teammates about it, more friends and family, just realizing how many people noticed that I wasn't necessarily at my best and that I was struggling. When I realized how many people, kind of took notice of that and actually cared, that was like empowering to me, because I don't know, it made me want to keep working on my mental health that much more. Just to know that there were those people out there that were paying attention and really just wanted me to be at my best.
Yeah, going off that, I think it's really cool. As I started opening up more about my mental health, to see the different perspectives that I would get from my friends and my parents and from Jeremy and teammates. So I didn't necessarily have a large network. I'm fairly open with the people that I talk to very regularly. And I think that just having different perspectives, this kind of goes back to the generational question of getting different viewpoints from people's past life experiences and how they've dealt with their mental health, and then kind of applying that to you, because there's not one solution fits all. We talked about like how do people handle stress? That's completely different from person to person. So, and Jeremy said fine tuning. I really like that earlier. So it's just these different perspectives give you different ways that you can fine tune your own personal mental health discussions with other people.
I guess the last question to wrap up the roundtable discussion here, I'll leave it to Jeremy. Jeremy, why is it so important to break the stigma around mental health, to get people to understand that, yes, it is important for a student athlete to be physically fit and in peak performance, but the mental side of the game that in more recent years is starting to be discussed. Why is it so important to break the stigma, to get people to understand that physically and mentally a student athlete needs to be in top shape?
Yeah, I think the stakes are really high. I think percentages, when people look at the statistics behind mental health, they're always kind of shocked at how high it is. But it's a common thing. I mean, you're talking about at least a third of the population dealing with a mental health issue at any one time. So for college students and college student athletes, it's higher. It's around 40% of college students report having clinically significant mental health issues. So, and that doesn't mean they need anything. They don't need to be medicated, or they don't need, but like their stress reaches a clinically significant level or whatever it is. So I think it's normal. So most people are going to go through it at some point in their life, and breaking the stigma allows people to get in touch with the resources they need. So being comfortable talking to a teammate, and that teammate says, hey, you should talk to your coach, and that coach puts you in contact with a professional maybe, or opening up or having a good relationship with your athletic trainer who can talk you through some steps and work with you. And then the more you open up about it, the more other people open up with you. So it just increases people's relationships across the board. If you have a really tight-knit team and your team's mentally healthy, your team's going to perform at a very high level. So I think it's really good. I think the stakes are high. I think when mental health isn't taken care of properly or isn't addressed properly, I mean, the stakes are people end up in the hospital, people die. So it's not just missing a season. It's not just having to sit out a game. I think it's really keeping people safe, keeping people healthy. And then, moving from those very severe diagnoses causing a lot of problems to, okay, what does wellness look like? What does growth? What does high level functioning look like? And that's an exciting process to go through, where you maybe can see someone when they're down and then see their growth and development to where they're at the top of the game. They're graduating, they're doing well in school, they're doing well in life. So it's an exciting process, and I think the risks of not addressing it are very high, but also the benefit of when you address it and invest in it, the reward, the payoff is huge.
All right, well, I want to thank everybody for joining me today for this roundtable discussion and talk about mental wellness and trying to break the stigma regarding mental wellness. And I hope this is just a part of that process that Jeremy just mentioned in the early stages of getting people to openly discuss it. So thank you, everybody, for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.